Hello, I'm Gerard McClendon, host of Counterpoint on Lakeshore Public Television. Welcome to a town hall meeting on race, justice, and policing, a community conversation. Thanks to the City of Valparaiso, Porter County, Valparaiso University, Urban League of Northwest Indiana, City of Garrard, and Lakeshore Public Media for making this event a reality. Tonight, we allow public officials and citizens to discuss community-police relations in a civil discussion. Audience members may engage after each segment. Show of hands, everyone. How many people in this room think that police are doing the best that they possibly can to protect us? Show of hands. Okay. Who thinks the biggest police issue is race? All right. Who respects police officers? Okay. Ooh, okay. Well, mostly everyone. A few people, a little dissension there. Who thinks that the recent presidential election will drastically change policing issues? Interesting. You know, your responses are insightful because the president created the White House panel on 21st century policing after grand juries in New York and Ferguson declined to charge 2 white police officers in the deaths of unarmed black men. The report includes building trust, policy and oversight, technology and social media, community policing and crime reduction, training and education, officer wellness and safety. Your town hall panelists tonight are City of Valparaiso Mayor Jon Costas, Dean of Valparaiso Law School Andrea Lyon, Pastor David Ashley Sr. from Redeemed Fellowship Church, Valparaiso University Professor Ivan Bodenstiner, Porter County Sheriff David Reynolds, and activist Christina Hearne. Thank you all for being on panel tonight. We really appreciate your bravery in a topic that is so sensitive to everyone in this room and definitely everyone in the United States. So let's just open up. I'm going to go to you first, Sheriff Reynolds. So when we talk about expectations or perceptions in law enforcement efforts, how do we battle assumptions and perceptions?
Well, that's a good question, but I think you need to know, I mean, from my sheriff's perspective, I need to know my communities. And some of the answers is really, I do want to probably acknowledge I thought more hands were raised on the last question, but it's interesting to see that a lot of people here believe that race is one of the main issues for law enforcement, and that might be true in certain communities. But I think from my perspective, it's important that we understand that people have these feelings. Whether I believe that or not, it's important to acknowledge that it does exist. Yeah. And I mean, I could give you what my opinion is in Porter County, and it's not race. It's substance abuse. And how that relates to race, I'm not sure if it does. Yeah. But because I have to go right back to who's in my jail, and the people that are in my jail are there directly because of substance abuse, like 95%. So good. That's where I would come.
Good. Dean Lyon, I want to come right to you on this because he mentions a very good subject in terms of knowing his community and how important that is, regardless of race, class, gender, socioeconomic background. The key is to know the citizens that you have responsibility to serve and protect. But what do you think about perceptions and expectations as it pertains to race and in our justice system and in policing?
Well, a little bit of a disclaimer. My background is criminal defense, and that's what I've done for a long time. I'm from Chicago, so I have the experience of working with and against some of those officers. In my experience, there is very strong racial prejudices that all of us, I'm not exempting myself, all of us have as a result of the media, as a result of how we've been brought up, as a result of a lot of things. And unfortunately, it plays out very starkly with the police. And you know, I don't know very much about the sheriff's department here, I don't disagree that substance abuse is a significant problem. Why we treat it as a criminal problem when it's a public health problem is another whole conversation. You know, why we have used substance abuse as a way of keeping an underclass down is another whole conversation. But you have to have, I'm the mother of 2 black children, and I have had to have the talk with my son and with my daughter.
The talk. What talk?
The talk about
How to behave when you get pulled over.
Not if, but when you get pulled over, so that you don't get killed.
But isn't that a little presumptuous, though?
No.
You said not if, but when.
When. And I can give you a when. My son, who used to be little, I swear he was at one time, but he has no neck anymore, and he's a very big guy, you know. And when he was 12, we were living in that liberal mecca called Ann Arbor, Michigan. At the time, I was teaching there, and we had a babysitter, not because he couldn't take care of himself, but his little sister might have been bruised or something. So I wanted another person there. And so one of my students, this lovely young lady with red hair named Sarah, was the babysitter, and he was 12, and she was nice to him, so he had a crush on her. You do know how 12-year-old boys are,
oh,
right?
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So what happens?
So what happens is he sees her on the street, and so he starts waving, you know, Sarah, Sarah, and he runs across the street. And before he can get there, the Ann Arbor police throw him on a car, and you know he's 12, because you know he's dangerous. He's black. I thought I had a couple more years before I had to have that talk with him.
Let me go to Professor Ivan Bodenstiner. You thought you would have had the opportunity to have some sort of buffer period where you could get 2 or 3 more years before you had to have that talk. Ivan Bodenstiner, what do you think about perceptions when it comes to race and policing, or when it comes to just American society?
Well, there's a well-known concept that's called implicit bias, and we all have it. And I think it's at work in many arenas, not just with the police. And so if you look at our criminal justice system as a whole and look at who we incarcerate, the population in the prisons is way out of whack with the population in general. And so if you just look at it from that end, you get the impression there's something funny going on, there's some distortion here, there's disproportionate imprisonment. Now, not everybody who encounters the police ends up in prison, thank God, but I think you get a fairly good indication of the disparity.
Yeah, you know, this is interesting because I want to go to you, Pastor Ashley, next, but I want to give props to Sheriff Reynolds because somewhat of an acquaintance of mine, some of you may have known him, the rapper Twista, who is from Chicago, was pulled over in Porter County on the way to a rap performance. Twista had contraband, I'll try to use a nice word here, in the car. I believe Twista may have been driving a very conspicuous automobile. He's known to drive his big Mercedes. Sometimes he drives his Rolls Royce at times. The Porter County Sheriff and the Porter County Police Department treated him with the utmost respect. And so I want, you know what, we got to give him a round of applause for that. I got to give it up for that. I got to give it up. Because things could have gone really bad for Twista on that particular day. Now, if it was someone other than Twista, I don't know what would have happened, but I know that there was respect due. Pastor Ashley, talk to me. Perceptions and expectations. There's a professor at Stanford who's done numerous studies on if you put a white person's face and you show a knife or a gun, it's considered hunting or cooking. If you put a black man's face in a photograph with a gun or a knife, it's considered a little bit more derogatory. What do you think as a pastor? How do we get to the core of breaking these perceptions up spiritually?
You know, as a pastor, you know, I am also a father to also, and also the husband of a police officer. The perception is going to be out there, and to break that, we got to have more of these conversations, you know, because there is a truth that we all know, but we pretend that we don't, you know, until we get to the core of the problem, and then have these open conversations, some open dialogues, and some healthy conversations. This is how we start to change and alter those presumptions.
Yeah, yeah. Let's go a little bit further. So how do we make justice consistent for all people regardless of race? It's tough on police departments, it's tough on sheriff offices because they may enforce the law, but then the assailant or the perpetrator ends up in the court system. And the court system sometimes is a total disconnect from law enforcement. So when it comes to that disconnect, and I'm gonna go to you on this, Christina Hearne, that disconnect, have you found that there's a disconnect in activism in terms of making people more accountable, making the state more accountable?
I think that there definitely is a disconnect in terms of, one, people don't know the law, so you can't act on it and you can't stand up for your rights if you don't know it. But another big issue that we have is we have to look at the culture of our communities, of our society, and why were these policies created? When we think about things like the war on drugs, let's go to the history of the war on drugs. And why was this created? What's the background? And what's been the effects of the war on drugs on communities, especially poor African-American communities, poor Latino communities? Who are we locking up? And then as we start looking at things of when we're starting to see, as the sheriff talked about, we're seeing that there are now more drug issues going into things. It's moving out of the inner cities, and we're going into the suburbs, we're going to rural areas.
Yeah.
And now we're somehow creating needle exchange programs, and we're creating programs where we're protecting these people. But I think a lot of the people and activists who have stood on the backgrounds in the African-American communities will say, so where were these programs and where was this defense for our communities?
Do you think we'll ever get to the point where drug abuse or drug use is considered an illness as opposed to a criminal behavior across the board in the United States? Do you think we'll ever get there?
I think that's a hope, but I think it's going to take a lot of change. It's going to take a shift in the mindsets of people, of policymakers, of community members as a whole, because there are even people in the African-American community who say, oh, they got themselves there. But we don't look at the fact that drugs, as people have mentioned, are a mental illness. And why are people using drugs? Typically, those are coping mechanisms. Those are things to derail stress and the various obstacles that happen when you're living in a stressful environment where there's no jobs, where there's low income, where there's so many things that are fighting against you. But we look at it as, oh, they got themselves there, so they deserve to be in jail. But then, again, that creates a cycle of oppression. And how do we stop that cycle?
Yeah, that's always difficult. We saw that in the crack era where everyone was considered a criminal, you know, and we kind of see that. We kind of see that resurrecting itself, but not in inner city New York, but we see it happening in rural white America with meth, with crystal meth. Let me go to, you know what, I'm gonna go to the audience questions. I'm coming to you, Mayor Costas, with the next question. Yes, state your name and your question.
Hi, my name is Connor Sullivan. I'm a student at Valparaiso University. I'm also involved with a lot of the activism in Chicago that has been relentless in shining a light on police brutality in the city. Yet despite our efforts, we haven't really seen any positive change in policing with the Chicago Police Department. The number of shootings are actually going up, not down. So my question is, why does it seem like so many police departments are resistant towards implementing reforms?
This is a good question. Implementing reforms? Reforms. Okay,
Yes.
who wants to tackle that? Sheriff Reynolds?
All I can, you know, I really can't comment on what's going on in Chicago. Like, I can't comment on what happened in Benton Harbor or, you know, in south side of Chicago. But I will tell you that we have an every time we have a use of force incident in the sheriff's office, we investigate it. And you know, I'm the worst guy for statistics. Okay, because, you know, I don't like to rely on statistics, but a lot of times statistics tell you if you have a problem. And I think we need to keep everything in perspective. Even though there's a lot of strong opinions here and strong beliefs, all I can really comment on and talk about, I don't know, I can't tell you what happened in Ferguson, or I can't tell you what happened what's happening in the south side of Chicago. Sure, you're talking about meth. But I know all our white kids that are living in Porter County are going to the south side of Chicago buying their heroin and coming back here. So what do we do about that? We're trying to do the best we can. But as far as use of force is concerned, we had 12 use of force incidences in Porter County this year, which we're using, normally we're not talking about shootings, we're mostly talking about less lethal, which is tasers. There were 12 of them, all white people. We had 16 last year, 4 females, 12 males, 1 black person. Okay, so that doesn't, and I know exactly what happened with that one individual, but if those numbers were reversed or if they were more disparaging, but even regardless, when we have them, we thoroughly investigate them. And I think the problem in other communities, and I don't want to comment on them, is that maybe they're not investigated in the way they should do. You know what I'm saying? But all I can do is talk about what's happening with me. I mean, I'm the sheriff of Porter County. I was asked to be on this panel. I know what we're doing in Porter County. And it's all about building trust. You know, use of force is a side issue. But working with the mayor of Valparaiso, working with there's a lady right behind you. We work with her. We work with the Project Neighbors Project. We work with the race council that the mayor's put together. But there's a reason why we do that, because we're exchanging and building relationships.
Yeah.
And if you don't do that, if you don't communicate, then you're never going to get off you're never going to understand what the situation is.
Yeah, that's for real. Thank you for your question. I'm going to go. Thank you for that assist, because I'm going right to Mayor Costas now. One of the toughest jobs in the United States is to be the mayor of any city. I don't care how large or how small it is, because at every point of the day, there's this element of worry. There's this element of concern about my citizens, about the people on my block, about my officers, about my economic development department. What are you doing, Mayor Costas, here in Valparaiso to make things better in terms of community relations, police relations, and being a proactive mayor as opposed to a reactive one?
Thank you. Well, it is important to be proactive. And first of all, I think these conversations are great because understanding community, it all begins with conversations. I have a perspective, it is limited. If I listen to other people and try to understand their perspective, it helps me to be a better mayor. Some of the changes that we've made is we created a Human Relations Council. Communities are changing. Our population of African Americans has more than doubled in the last 13 years. I saw that trend years ago. That's why we created the Human Relations Council. I've headed that up for the first 7 years or 8 years, and it's doing good work in the community. So you're right. You need to be proactive. You need to have a listening ear, and you need to celebrate accountability. We all need it. There's accountability all throughout our Constitution. And so, for instance, our police department is accredited. That's one of the first things we did. We're going to say we're going to be accountable to an outside source to come in, go through our statistics, and tell us where we're falling short.
It's a lot of cities that don't like
that,
to do
no.
that. That don't like to do that, because it's one thing to evaluate yourself. Of course you're gonna look good. You know how people, let me get one of your weaknesses. And then you ask a person to list their weakness and it ends up being a strength. That's totally skewed and totally biased. But that's good that you have someone from the outside to say, hey, let's break this down and see what's really going on. We're gonna go back to the audience here for another question. State your name, sir, and your question.
Good evening. My name is Colonel Antonio Daggett. I'm a retired Army colonel with 30 years of military service. My dad is a retired Chicago police officer. My wife and I, we've given birth to 10 children. We have 8 boys and 2 girls, 8 black sons and 2 black daughters.
Oh man, you got a lot of kids. And that's a colonel right there.
Obviously, the issue of race falls very closely to who I am and what I stand for, having defended this country for 30 years. It's important for me now to see that that defense was for everyone in this nation, to be respected with dignity. That's critically important. What I'm asking the panel to consider is how do we begin to stop dancing around this issue of race? Stop coddling this issue of race. Stop accepting presupposed perceptions and deal with the reality. We're losing our children. Thank God, as I speak to you tonight, none of my 8 sons have been a victim of this. But every child that is lost in this is a child of mine. And at this point, we must commit ourselves in a very, very almost militaristic way to go at this issue of race for the sake of our children. There's so much at stake with this issue, and I think that's why we coddle this issue, because we don't recognize what's at stake. The last time this nation was at this kind of crossroads was this issue of the Civil War. America paid with 500,000 lives to end slavery in this country. Do we have to pay that much again to end racism in America? That's my question.
Wow. Dr. Ivan Bodenstiner, I want to go to you on this because Colonel Daggett raises the question of when will we stop dancing around race? It's America's original sin. The country's built on slavery. Number one cash crop in the world was cotton. Who picked the cotton? So we're in a situation where we're dancing around race, where we're using euphemisms, we're using, at times, hyperbole. We're saying, black people will be okay, Hispanics are all right, whites are poor too. How do we keep from dancing around this, face it head to head, and acknowledge the problem?
I don't know if we can solve that this evening.
We can do
but
it. We can do it. We can do it.
Yeah, if you go back, I think it's about 50 years now when the Kerner report came out in the 60s after some real difficult race riots and so forth. And much of what's in that report appears in the report that President Obama received from the group that he commissioned recently. And the sad truth is we don't learn. And maybe we don't want to learn. And I think part of the problem is that oftentimes in many communities, not always, but in many communities, the police and the policed are from different worlds. And the only interaction, they live in different places. Despite Brown versus the board, they go to different schools. And their interaction is in a tense situation. The first time this officer and this individual come together is it's like this. And I expect that in those situations there's a lot of fear, and maybe fear on both sides. Yeah. And I think a large part of it is that we are so segregated. And one of the things that came out of the Kerner report, one of the recommendations is you have to integrate the police departments. Hire more racial minorities. Same thing came out a couple of years ago. Why don't we deal with that?
Why don't you think it's happening though, Professor?
Well, it's not happening because unfortunately I think there's a lot of, I won't call it cronyism, but a lot of people.
Nepotism, cronyism. My dad was a cop, I'm going to be a cop, my son's going to be a cop.
And then you can add to that the fear, if you're a police chief who wants to integrate, somewhere in the back of your mind you have a lawyer telling that chief, look, the Supreme Court says you can't favor a person just because of his or her race, which isn't exactly true. But the only way to integrate a police force is to take affirmative, intentional steps to recruit and hire So my guess is that if in Ferguson, the police department somewhat reflected the population of Ferguson, that there would have been much better relationships between the police and the community.
And Ferguson was a powder keg because you had a majority black community being policed by a non-majority police department, and in Ferguson they were purposely pulling over and giving tickets to people who were disenfranchised, and that was problematic at a rate that was much higher than those that weren't black in those same situations. I want to go to you, Dean. Does judicial sentencing make mayors, activists, college presidents, residents and police officers, does that add stress when Sheriff Reynolds and his department, they do their job and they may do it correctly, but then once a person ends up in the justice system, you have more bias. So what does that do for a community as well? You know, police departments are getting all the stress, but if judges aren't turning up the heat in some situations or turning up the heat too much in others, that's problematic too.
Well, yes, that's definitely the case. And the criminal justice system, if you were to watch a group of incarcerated pretrial detainees come into at 26 in California, you would think we were in South Africa during apartheid.
Oh, it looks like slavery.
It
looks like slavery.
And-
you know.
And the 13th Amendment has this little thing that carved out, no involuntary servitude unless you've done something wrong. It carves that out. And so it's very complex because, first of all, most judges in state courts who are in criminal court were prosecutors and nothing else before that, so they don't have any experience except on the prosecutorial side. They are largely majority, they are largely politically conservative, and they're uninterested in the stories of the defendants. That being said, there's another problem, which is that they aren't always hearing the stories of those who are accused, because those of us who represent poor people in the criminal justice system are overwhelmed, carrying 200, 300, 400 felonies at any given time. 1,400 misdemeanors a year is the average of what public defenders carry. Are you hearing me? 1,400. You can't figure out the names of your clients, let alone what their stories are. And you were talking about integrating the police department. One of the reasons that that's difficult is that many minority young men end up with arrests on things that their white counterparts would have some kind of station adjustment, or go and fix the window you broke. Go mow the lawn for a while, which, by the way, teaches you a lot more than locking up somebody.
Community service.
Right? Especially, does everybody remember what their judgment was like when they were 15, 16, 17?
Oh, horrible.
22.
I mean, I wanted to be cool desperately.
It's
and
a
I was the
miracle
biggest
I'm here.
egghead ever.
It's a miracle.
Yeah, I
It's a
mean,
miracle.
nobody has good judgment then, and that rocky time is where we ought to be caring for and looking out for the best interests of our young people, as opposed to punishing them. We look at I've heard police officers say, there's 15-year-olds and then there's 15-year-olds. And what they really mean is there's white 15-year-olds and then there's black 15-year-olds. That's what they mean. And I don't mean to cast aspersions on every officer. I don't think that that's the case. But when you were speaking before about statistics, there was a study done by University of Chicago about complaints against police officers in Chicago. And they found that 85% of the complaints over a 10-year period were against the same 5% of officers. Do you have to be a genius to figure out what to do?
So it's a few bad apples,
Well-
but nothing's really done because the police unions protect them. I got to keep it moving.
I'm sorry.
I got to keep it moving. So
I talked too much.
So Pastor Ashley, can faith-based institutions shape a climate of policing? What responsibility do churches, do mosques, do synagogues have when it comes to demanding better policing? Or should they even worry about that and just go to church on Sunday and not call the police department? What do you say? What?
Well, and where I come from, they're really reluctant to touch when it comes to politics. As a pastor, when I was elected to be the chairperson of the Northwestern Indiana Ministers Conference, it was a pull for the pastors to get more involved because, we pastor, as a black pastor, I pastor people who are in poverty, African Americans. And it was a need to be at the courthouse because Big Mama has a son who's in trouble. He may not attend church regularly, but of course, but he's in trouble, and Big Mama, she's in distress. Or there's a time where I got to go down to the police station. So now there was a pull for the pastors to get more involved and use their pastoral influence. So, and what we have concluded, we begin to solidify, you know, as we begin to come together, because we're all similarly situated. You know, we solidify and to start using our influence to put pressure on the government, you know, to do more.
Good.
You know, it is the government responsibility to take charge of the police. You know, even though that, of course, we're talking about police and they may be a small fraction of the problem, because it is a big economical scope, you know, and I think that the first thing we got to do is solidify. Once we solidify, we put pressure on our government.
You think most police officers are doing a good job?
I'm sorry, what you say?
You think most police officers are doing a good job?
Well, I believe that you have a small fraction of police that do a bad job that reflects the whole iconic police department.
Yeah.
You know, and of course, one bad apple spoils a whole bunch. Think about 5 or 10.
I got to get the mayor in, I got to get Christina in, but I want to say this. I want to go to the mayor first, and I'm going to go to Christina, then we're going to go to questions. Mayor Costas, as I roll through Valparaiso today, I saw 2 police officers. One came up behind me. As a black man, you just kind of get that little nervous twitch, you know, but I knew I was under the speed limit. I knew everything was good. Officer drove by me and waved. I was like, "Ooh, today is a good day." I felt like Ice Cube. It was amazing. So what do you do? What do you tell your officers about those times when there may be people in the community who may feel compromised? How do you have your officers to not just serve and protect, but exude the serve and protection in a way that is sensitive?
Well, first of all, that's very real. I've talked to enough of my friends and colleagues who are African American who have that visceral reaction. So it's a reality, and so some of the things that we've done, we've been using a consultant, a diversity training in our police department for years. So that's a natural part of training our police officers. And we talk a lot, whenever I address a new officer, I talk about the concept of humility. Humility doesn't mean weakness, it means power under restraint and used only for noble purposes. So we have a duty, and police officers have a duty, just like we all do, to use the power granted to us carefully and nobly. And that means understanding that those of a different color are going to have a different perspective when they're stopped, and we need to be trained to deal with that real perspective. And I think the sheriff's been doing the same sorts of things that our police department has been doing, and engaging in these types of conversations, so that we can again address a very real reaction and perception to being stopped and
Good. Christina, how do you push back? How do you, as an activist, get police departments to understand what Mayor Costas just said? You know, I don't want to have to go 10 and 2 all the time and act like a good person all the time. I should be just as relaxed as the next man behind the wheel. How do we push back on that?
I think one of the things that we have to realize is that we have to start teaching our African American youth that you have the right, and to walk into that right, to feel like you're safe. And the sad part is that our kids no longer feel like they're safe. My grandmother, who's 87 years old, no longer feels like she's safe as we look at recordings and as we're watching things. And the sad thing about technology right now is that we're seeing everything in real time.
Everything.
And so as we're seeing things in real time, it's creating increased fear. But I also think that that's a positive in the same point, because people can no longer deny. Because, you know, growing up, I grew up in Garrard, Indiana, and one of the things that I always heard was, you know, oh, we live in a post-racial society and blah, 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 blah. No, that's not real life.
You don't think so?
No.
You know, you got nice clothes on. I got a suit on. We got microphones.
And in the same way,
L'Oreal Kilpatrick is in the front row. It's all good. Kumbaya.
and they see me, they see you, they see her, and we're black. And so
wow.
regardless of what I have on, regardless of where I am. I'm an African American, and if you don't know where I'm from, if you don't hear me speak, the first thing that you see is that I'm an African American woman, especially when I'm from Garrard. That's one of the biggest negatives. I would say I was a student here before I actually came to work here. And one of the biggest things, I will never forget this, my first day of classes, I walked into class, and we were introducing them where we were from, and someone said, "Oh, you made it out."
Oh, wow.
Like it was a war zone. I've lived in Garrard, Indiana my whole life. Well, now I live in Portage, me and my husband. But I lived in Garrard, Indiana my whole life, and I never once felt the fear that I constantly felt as I walked down the streets of Valparaiso. Part of it, I will say, is that one, people don't look like me. So I will openly admit that's my own bias because I was afraid.
Yeah.
But another part of that bias is I was one of those people who was stopped by police officers and asked a million questions. I remember someone looking at my ID and saying, "Oh, so why are you here?" "I'm a student." "Oh, are you sure you're a student here?" "Oh, I proudly made straight A's every semester that I was here." But it was that fact that because I was African American and my ID said I was from Garrard,
So
it caused bias.
we got to make sure we get the badge number when that happens, you know, and report it immediately. And now we got social media. We can put everybody on blast.
But I know that. But how many of our students know that? How many of our community members know that?
Right. They have to be taught. Absolutely. Let me go to the next question. State your name and your question.
My name is Haruku Nathan, and I want to state that the Sheriff Department is a unique entity. I don't know if it's the training. I know Lake County is the same thing. It is the approach. The problem is with the municipal policing that goes on in this country. It is the attitude. As soon as they come towards you, the whole physiology, the way they approach you, the way they talk to you. And it's not race. The black ones sometimes are worse than the white ones. It is the attitude, maybe it's coming from the uniform, maybe it comes from this sense of empowerment. But when they approach a car or approach you, the attitude is always negative. And then you have the ones that have been there for years and years and years. And the police organization, the FOP, knows they've been doing bad, knows they've been doing wrong, and involved in criminal activity. And they turn their head against it. I believe that police people, the municipal police people, should be held at a higher standard because it represents the law. And we sit back and allow these people, because if you or I or any other person in this audience do what they did, we would be in somebody's prison. But yet, we turn our back to their behavior. So my question to the panel is this. What can you do in the training of new people coming up so that they will be able to respect everybody?
That's a great question. So, okay, hold tight. Let me ask you this before I let the panel answer the question. Do you believe that, and I'll just throw two things out there that are somewhat obtuse. Do you believe that all police officers should have minimally a college degree?
Not only a college degree, I think they should be paid more so you would attract the proper people that would do the proper job professionally. The pay is too low.
Very good. And do you believe that they should have to take advanced psychology courses?
Yes, and they should be evaluated every so often because it does affect their home life, they affect their personal life, all of that inclusive.
Okay, let's restate your question, and I'm gonna unleash the panel on you.
My question is that what can be done in the training of candidates coming into the enforcement realm of policing, especially the municipalities, to make sure that they will treat everyone respectfully? Thank you.
Sheriff Reynolds.
First of all, I want to answer his question, but I want to thank the Colonel for his service. And I think we never got to answer your question, and I want to answer his question real quick, and I'll get to this guy's. I think you have a legitimate question, and I think that question needs every police. I know that we have some police chiefs here, and they understand what I'm saying. That stops with us, the guy who's in charge. The only way we can get to what you want is that the guy in charge has to make sure that the people that they hire, that's what you're talking about. We have a letter of inclusiveness that we had all our chiefs sign and sheriffs sign when I was first-time sheriff. And it's really a powerful message that all of our rookies have to sign. We have a code of ethics. We have a code of ethics that we live by that doesn't tolerate bigotry, it doesn't tolerate injustice, because inclusiveness is a right that we all have, and we need to, but that starts at the top. Because, you know, when I was asked to be on this panel, I went through all our statistics to see if we had any anomalies, if there's anything going on that we do this monthly, but I wanted to make sure. And I asked all of we have a lot of young guys in our department. And I go, is any of this remotely happening? Like where somebody's stopped because they're black, or stopped for some reason in an inappropriate way. And they're looking at me like, I'm from outer space. Really? You know, it's not happening. But see, and I honestly believe it's not happening. But I also honestly believe that I'm not naive, that I know it's a continuing, you know, our community is diverse, and it's becoming more diverse. And then that has challenges. Now, our code of ethics gives us our guidelines on how we act and how we perform every day. We live by those. What you're asking, the answer is, and this is why we're talking to Stacy. We've been talking to Stacy Miller for a year, trying to figure out how we're going to deal with teaching law enforcement, not only rookies, but the seasoned guys, about implicit and explicit and bias. Okay? Because it's really important, because we all have some implicit biases. Everybody in this room does. But when you act with your explicit biases inappropriately, now that's intolerable. Maybe we will charge you, but you're definitely getting fired from my police department. But that starts from the top. And you know, when you have different departments, would you have guys that are chiefs or guys that are your command staff? Your command staff has to believe exactly what I just said, or there's a complete breakdown. I mean, if I say it's all good and my command staff says, I don't believe in that one bit, then it's not going to work. Just like in the military. Absolutely. It goes all the way down, and it starts from the top. And it takes the responsibility. You talked about the mayor. It starts with him. He has to understand that, and the people, not just law enforcement, but all his heads, all his department heads have to believe that.
So he has to understand that. You have to understand that as how long have you been mayor?
13 years.
13 years. So you're doing something right. Doing something right. And I've seen Valpo grow. I've seen Valparaiso as a community grow economically. Do you feel that Valparaiso as a community is growing when it comes to sensitivity to its citizens? And do you see it growing in its sensitivity of police officers and its citizens?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have much work to do. We're always works in progress. But we've seen, just by our population of African American has more than doubled in the last 12 or 13 years. Our Hispanic population.
Black folks moving to Valpo?
Yeah. So it's
okay.
and that's increasing. And so you can see that anecdotally as you walk down the street, and it's a beautiful thing. And so our citizens are realizing this is who we are, and we have been proactive in our police department by, again, having diversity training. We're accountable to CALEA, we're accredited, and we're doing the things. The thing that we really need work on is trying to engage minorities to become police officers. Our police department does not reflect our citizenry, and it should. We need, and we've been talking about this, and we've been doing things, but it's hard because, frankly, they're in great demand.
Yeah.
And oftentimes you hire a minority officer, and in 2 years the FBI wants them because it's just, we need to find a solution to that. And that's part of Altogether Valpo. We're working on that, but we need to improve on the systematic disparities.
Dean, you had a comment, then I'm going to go to the next question.
I mean,
yes.
it would help if we would stop arresting every young Black and Hispanic person so that they are not eligible to become police officers. That might help to start with. But
it's like 1 in 3, 1 in 4.
One in 3 is under the aegis of the criminal justice system. 1 in 3.
Yeah.
I mean, that is just shocking. One of the other issues, relating to the question regarding training, has to do with what happens to somebody after they are on the front line as a patrol officer or as a detective or whatever for too long. I mean, we wouldn't, Colonel, think of putting somebody on the front line of the wars for 30 years. We wouldn't think of doing it for 25 years.
Oh, wow.
Because you cannot, there's an awful lot of secondary trauma that occurs as a result of what you see, whether you get personally hurt or not. And so when you have an officer who only sees people at their worst, who only sees people that are under stress, who only sees the ugly side of things, and only sees that for 20 or 25 years with no relief, with there being a stigma in seeking help.
Yeah.
If you go to a therapist, you're weak. You know, if you go and talk to your pastor, you're one of those words that our president-elect likes to use. Sorry. You know, right? If you do any of those things, there's something wrong with you. And yet we have to recognize that there's trauma that is occurring to the police. It occurs to prosecutors. God knows it occurs to those of us who do defense work.
Yeah. So let's talk about the great segue. Let's talk about the culture of understanding, and I'm going to go with the next question. There seems to be this realm of empathy that we're missing.
The empathic divide.
Yes, the empathic divide.
That's
and
my
I'm
word
going to
for
go
it.
to this gentleman. Please state your name and your question.
Certainly. Theodore McClendon, and first an observation and then a question. Indeed, the empathic divide. Indeed. I was going to talk about empathy before I get to the question. And you demonstrate something, Consul. You demonstrate something I noticed when I was in corporate America, which I absolutely loathe corporate America for this reason. A study has just come out that said a full 75% of white Americans don't have a single black friend. And I had developed, you know, since I loathe the workplace so much, I had developed an insight into picking the co-workers that probably never dealt with black people before. Now, I'm not gonna play Nostradamus here with the panel, but it's obvious, it's palpable that you've dealt with black people. Empathy is the absolute key, and then we'll avoid the denial of the so-called colorblind society and the post-racial pablum that they give us. And the worst insult of all, worse than the N-word, is get over it.
Get over it.
I'm not getting over it, I'm sorry.
Melting pot.
Yeah, the melting pot,
we're just
the salad bowl.
We're salad. It's nonsense.
Those are myths.
Continue with your question,
You insult
sir.
us with that
You
when
got
you
me
say
fired
that.
up here. You got me fired up.
Education. So then, I think what's key is early education. And so I asked the panel, what is the role of early education? Not when they join the police force. Early education for the child in those all-white schools that never saw a black person before. What is the role of early education to demonstrate the plight of those black people that they won't see until they're 25 years old?
Ms. Hearne and Dr. Bodenstiner, either of you want to tackle that?
Sure. I think one of the major things, we do need that education, and it's missing, but I also want to throw in the fact that education is not just missing in our all-white schools, it's missing in our black schools as well. How many of our black children don't know about themselves? Because in our history books, what they're gearing is European history, and what they see of themselves is this negative media and the stereotypes that are on TV. I can say, again, I was born and raised in Garrard. I went to a predominantly African-American high school, but if you turn through my history book, and I was Gary, Indiana's where there was the first African-American mayor, there was a little paragraph about this big. That's all I saw about it, that, you know, slavery, it had about 2 lines. And so what are we teaching our children? But also, I would say it's also, I believe, the parents' responsibility to teach their children and to get them engaged and to, you know, there are museums. Take your children to DuSable so they can learn about African-American history. Take them to cultural events. For individuals that live in Porter County, Valpo always has different cultural events. So bring them on campus so they can learn about different cultures. Have them experience things like our Office of Multicultural Programs, because our students are not learning. And when you don't know, then your mind is open to all of the negativity that is out there. And I think that's a huge problem for our kids. I will say my roommate, and the little girl was just the cutest little girl ever, but my senior year, I had a roommate, and she was babysitting, I guess it was her niece. And me and my best friend we were getting ready to leave, and she was like, "Oh, you're going home?" I was like, no, I'm just gonna go to a movie. And she had in her mind I was going home. So when I came back, about 2 hours later, she's like, oh, and this was her exact words, oh, I thought it would take longer to get to Africa.
Really?
The little girl was about 4 years old. Now, there's no way you can tell me that that is an original thought. No, that's something that has been ingrained in her.
Yeah.
And why are we ingraining this hate and these stereotypes into our children? The same thing.
Yeah, and then we end up looking, we never really get to reality because we're mimicking a copy of a bad copy of a facsimile. And then when we ingest today's media, it's even more ridiculous because we'll look at a television show and think that's that person's actual culture. You know, we know that all white people don't live like friends. We know that. But when you see that every day, you start to believe it. We know that all black people don't live like blackish. But once you see it, it's like, so that's what those people are like. And so anytime one of the most frustrating things in the United States is that everybody thinks someone else is an other. That's frustrating, you know. Doctor.
Well, I think the education is very important, but I think the best way to educate children of all races is to have them together. And if we could get to the, I go back to the segregation in our schools. I mean, we have to make it impossible for white parents to run from the schools where black children are enrolled. We have to get rid of those funny boundaries. And if they start interacting from a very young age, they have a much better chance of accepting each other as they grow older. Now, there's one other warning there is we have to keep them away from some parents. Because they go home from school where they got along fine with everyone, and they go home and learn something that's exactly the opposite.
Yeah, that's frustrating. You know what? Thank you, Dr. Bodenstiner. Question, your name, sir, and your question.
Yes, my name is Richard Severe. One of the consistencies with police violence has been the image of the black male body. My question is, as a man of color who's standing 6'2", 200 pounds, who's never been in a fight in my life, I want to know, and I'm new to this community, I want to know how my body is, how do I know that my body is not going to be perceived as inherently violent here in Valpo?
I'm going to leave that alone. Who wants to answer?
You don't, is the truth. I would rather say something else, but that's the truth. People will see someone physically similar to you who is lighter as less dangerous than you. That's just, I don't like telling you that, sir.
But I think we can come to grips with that with our own hidden or suppressed perceptions. And we can talk about those things, and we can be. That's why, again,
that's why we're here.
That's why we're here. That's why we do diversity training, so that people can say, "Oh, I guess I might think that way. I need to change that. I need to think differently about that." And that's why we're doing these sorts of things. I think we're making great progress in the city of Valparaiso. We're a lot different than we were 20 or 30 years ago. And it's little by little implementing these sorts of things we're talking about, having these conversations, realizing that my view of the world is just one little view of the world, and I need to understand others.
You know, the great singer, bass player Sting from the Police said, "There's no political solution to our troubled evolution. Have no faith in Constitution." Is there a spiritual answer here? Can a pastor of a church and a sheriff come together and say, let's figure this thing out? What do you think?
Sure.
I got about a minute left.
Sure.
1 minute.
You know what? It's always hope. There's always hope, and I believe, as often as we communicate and have these conversations, sit down and talk and allow people to be real and open, and not disenfranchise them because of their opinions and their experiences, I believe, of course, it can happen.
Sheriff, can we come together?
Absolutely, and I think that's a good question. I mean, I hope my glass is always half full, not half empty. And I can't stand up here and say, you don't have anything to worry about, but there's more a part of me that says you don't have anything to worry about. I mean, but again, you know, you can't control every officer, every person that's pulled over, their conduct and how they act. You know, but I think that's what we're trying to do here. We know we have a big responsibility here, and it's a challenge for law enforcement to really treat everybody equally, and that's what we're saying, regardless of what they look like or how or where they came from or what their economic background is. They're all equal, and and that's what, you know. I guess I keep not sound like a broken record, but it starts at the top. When you have a problem, if you don't deal with it, then that's a bigger problem.
Sheriff Reynolds, thank you for that. Ms. Hearne, thanks so much for coming out. Dr. Bodenstiner, Mayor Costas, Dean, Lyon, the one and only, Pastor Ashley, thanks so much for being with us in Valparaiso. You know, to solve a problem, we must first admit that we have one. We have a long way to go, but the conversation has started. Thanks to the City of Valparaiso, Porter County, Valparaiso University, Urban League of Northwest Indiana, and Lakeshore Public Media. Thanks all our guests for being on the show today. I want to tell you all that we need to be encouraged and do the best we can in this world to be good to our fellow man and fellow woman. Have a good evening.